Welcome to episode 60 of the Roundtable. I'm Grant Brisbee. I'm here with Andy McCullough. Marc Carig is on assignment, so we have Rustin Dodd pinch hitting for him, which is fantastic. I've had a question on my brain for years. Rustin, what did Andy's desk smell like at the Kansas City Star when you took it over? Like, what was in there?
I don't recall Andy having a desk. I don't know if newspapers gave you desk in like 2015. I think they just sort of said go to the ballpark and never come in here. I don't know. But I did. I'm a big Roundtable head, and I feel like you guys had so many good references to the 2014 and 2015 Royals. You were like, you know what we need? References to the 2016 Royals.
Seriously, like, okay, let's get right into it. Cheslor Cuthbert, what are your thoughts?
I mean, he's from Nicaragua, so that made him a novelty in baseball. I believe he's one of three or so in the history of baseball who are from that country. Might be four. I'm not sure, but he didn't really stick, but he was a hero. He had a lot of chickens. That was his thing. I could keep going.
Cheslor Cuthbert Chickens. It's fun to say. It's a good fantasy team name. All right, but we're not here to talk about Cheslor Cuthbert's Chickens. We're here to talk baseball. And I just want to say at the top, I'm not going to take a bow. I'm not going to take a victory lap, but I am the only pundit who was very clear that the Angels should sell. I was never on board with them reloading. I called this. Andy, why were you so wrong?
Well, I think it's great that we have Russ on this week for a variety of reasons, not just because you can pick up his book, Kingdom Quarterback, in bookstores soon about Patrick Mahomes and the rise of Kansas City, but also because he's been texting me about how the Angels completely goofed and should have traded Ohtani, and I figured we should just give him the floor.
Well, okay, so this was my take, and it all stemmed from our great Angels beat writer, Sam Bloom. So they've lost 7 games in a row now. So this is pretty extreme. But at the point that they'd lost 4 games in a row, Sam Bloom wrote that their playoff hopes are fading. And I just thought, if you come out of the deadline and you lose 4 games in a row, and that makes your playoff hopes fade, maybe you were never really in it to begin with. And so perhaps, buying or not, selling off pieces was not the smartest course of action. That is my argument. It's like if one little now 7 games is starts to get a little bad here, but 4-game losing streak and you're like, okay, we're done. It's like it was all up to that. I think you maybe should have calculated this a little bit better before you made your decisions. Is my general point.
Phil Nevin did say the other day, and I think this was before last night's loss. He said something to the effect of like, look, I know everyone says it's over. And I was like, oh my gosh, like they were just going for it 6 days ago. Yeah. I think that look, this outcome, I don't think any of us on this show, maybe Mark, because he's an idiot and he's not here. Maybe Mark thought it was like going to work. I think we all understood that they were, they're Bonnie and Clyde driving off the cliff, right? Like everyone understood this wasn't probably going to work. I think we all just sort of hoped that would become clear on like September 28th rather than August 8th, because it's like, oh, wow, this is going to make these last 2 months with Ohtani potentially really deflating. Like if they, end up being a 78 win team. Sam has been pretty consistently pessimistic about their chances, and it's really not because of disposition or anything. It's just because he can read the standings and sort of understand actuarial tables and how probability works.
And he watches the team every night.
Right. Unlike me, he stays up to watch the team because he doesn't live in New York. But yeah, I mean, there is it collapsed so quickly that, it's the Angels, they remain the Angels.
I will say this. I mean, in all seriousness, if they decided that their only chance of re-signing Ohtani was this path, then you can sort of understand it, even if it looks incredibly, short-sighted and, right now. So I guess I get that. It does put a lot of pressure on them to actually re-sign him, or at least really give a strong effort. But I mean, that's, I guess, the one defense of what they did. But maybe in that, I mean, like, does that increase their chances to, re-sign Ohtani? Could they have just maybe done sort of a half measure? I know everybody always sort of criticizes like the passive half measure where you don't buy or sell, but maybe just holding on to Ohtani, not buying, and then being like, let's try to re-sign this guy in the offseason would be like the one, could have been better. I don't know. Who can say?
Yeah, that is it. I still stick by that, so I didn't expect this to succeed. The Angels to me were like Philip Seymour Hoffman in Along Came Polly, where they're just going, making it rain, and like just against the backboard. I knew that was the likeliest scenario. But if you've increased your chances of signing Ohtani from 0% to 2%, that's worth a lot. That's worth the prospects they gave up. That's worth, I don't know what the actual percentages is. I'm not in conversation with Ohtani this week. Last week we were texting about birthday parties and stuff. But I just think if you increase it that much, because without Ohtani, it's not like the Angels had a robust farm system that was bursting at the seams, and even without Ohtani, the conveyor belt's going to start, and the Angels are back, baby.
Right.
This is it. This is their last gasp at relevance, and they chucked a half court shot and hurt someone in the process, but that's what they had to do. I still think.
Yeah, I mean, it actually, to continue your analogy, Grant, they're more like Philip Seymour Hoffman and Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, just sort of scrambling against all, hope to try and save this thing. And they've ended up like Philip Seymour Hoffman and Boogie Nights, just sitting in the car and be like, I'm such an idiot. I'm so stupid. So stupid.
I think now I'm going to go Philip Seymour Hoffman and Magnolia, where he's like on the phone. He's like, you got CJ Cron? Oh, okay. You got Randall Grichuk?
Oh man.
Okay, yeah, one of those. All right, sorry.
They did they've rated the farm system, what remained of the farm system, but it doesn't make a difference to their long-term trajectory of keeping Ohtani. It's just all about can this team actually win? And I was watching the game last night, you look at the lineup and you're like, okay, Luis Rengifo is leading off. It's okay. Ohtani bats second. I like that. Third was Brandon Drury. Okay. Fourth was Mike Moustakas. Fifth was CJ Cron. And I was just kind of it's a little short. It's a little short as far as lineups go.
But when you got that kind of bullpen, you got that kind of rotation.
It's tough, man.
Yeah. No, I feel bad because I was rooting for them. In all my trade deadline stuff, I was like, hey, this might not work, but I applaud them for going for it. Let's go Angels. But I expected it to fail, but over time, I wanted some ups to go with the downs over a period of 3 weeks where you almost kind of sort of believed in the Angels. And instead they're just just throwing up immediately in the trash can, just they're done. I mean, they're done. I feel terrible about them. I went back. So when I was pro Angels, I went back to the Giants because I saw a parallel with the Giants in the waning days of Barry Bonds and how he had no support. In 2004, he's got an on-base percentage .620 or something like that. And there was no players around him. And I was like, you know what the Giants should have done back then? Should have just emptied a thin farm system out and gotten Barry Bonds some help. And I was like, oh my gosh, who were the best prospects back then? Matt Cain. Yeah, if they traded him for CJ Cron back then, they wouldn't have won any of those titles. So whoopsie doodle, maybe the Angels extra screwed up there, but we'll see. We'll be back in 10 years because this show will definitely still be going on.
I spoke to someone on our audio team about the idea of us getting merch. If you're a Roundtable head and you would buy a t-shirt that says the only pro labor baseball podcast, email Marc Carig at mcarig@theathletic.com.
Please.
Or just tweet at him. Yeah. The thing with the Angels and the deadline and going for it is that over and over again, the Mets are an example of this as well, is that the things that I think the public, fans, and sometimes we as in the media who are searching for action, want, like teams to quote go for it, often doesn't work. And it often doesn't work in spectacular fashion. And so the teams that like don't go for it, the teams that, you know, like for example, the Orioles executed a hard tank. You know, the Braves do things, you know, that I think don't qualify as going for it per se, right? Like the Astros, etc. That's a little different with Verlander. That gets into more. I'm trying to make a broader point. I think that like the things that we, you know, the royal we want our teams to do are often like not short-sighted, but you can understand the other side of them in a way that. But the thing is, we've been so like in the post Astros, like, you know, scandal landscape, you sort of see like the flaws in you know, like sort of genuflecting before the C-suite executive class, and it just kind of creates this like weird, I don't know, I'm not making a great point here.
Yeah, well, like when a team wins the World Series and we sort of write about why they did or like the successes, you know, rarely does a general manager come out and say like, you know, the guy that was like a 4-win player on this team, we almost actually traded him like 2.5 years ago. At the deadline, you know, like we almost traded him when he was like 22, and man, that would have been stupid. You know, you just don't get that story. So like the moves you don't make just don't really get the same media attention as the moves that people do make. So the smart moves you don't make, you know, over time just become kind of forgotten.
Yeah.
And the moves that when you're talking about going for it and those moves that are satisfying to the fans, those are like a Cool Ranch Dorito chip. They're tasty. We crunch them. We forget about them. And the executives got to live with that. And they got to focus on, you know, the longer term, a shorter term, all that stuff. Not us, baby. We're just riffing on the moment, and we're just thinking like, oh, Randall Gritchick. Yeah, I've always been a Gritchick guy.
Right. He's a 2-win player. You can always have more of those. Like, yeah.
But I mean, when I wrote about the Angels for the Baseball Prospectus annual, their problem is just so clear. Their worst players are just remoras sucking wins above replacement from the top players, and it's not about getting more stars. It's not about finding an Anthony Rendon who works. It's about just raising the floor for everyone on that roster. And I don't know why they can't do it, because like Tyler Anderson's perfectly reasonable. Right. Perfectly reasonable move in that context. Just didn't work. And I don't know if it's organizational. I don't know if it's like monkey paw related. I just know it hasn't been working for him. It's bizarre.
Some of it I mean, obviously the overarching issue is, you know, Artie Moreto's ownership, but some of it does feel monkey paw type stuff, like Logan O'Hoppe just sort of, you know, getting hurt. Like they finally go on a heater and Mike Trout immediately breaks his hand, like that sort of stuff, you know. And Anthony Rendon like has, you know, a chronic broken leg or something, you know, but like there's not exactly clear what the injury is. You know, there's just all that sort of stuff that they are sort of perpetually under a black cloud. Some of it though is because they've been seeding the cloud that way, you know, with the way the team is run.
Yeah. I mean, Anthony Rendon, he's 33. He's not 42. He's just been a complete wash for the last 3 seasons. That I will chalk that up to monkey's paw. And I feel bad because the Angels actually do have an association with the monkey. So maybe that's like maybe they actually literally cut his paw off and like we're wishing on it. I don't know, but yeah, I don't know. I do know this is that you ever meet someone who like they learn a new word and then they have to drop it in every conversation. It's like, oh, I think that's very effervescent. That's me with Logan O'Hoppe.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Now that I know how she pronounced his name, it's like, well, if you consider the Logan O'Hoppe problem, you know, like all that stuff. So
if we ever figure out how to talk about Tyler Mahle, we'll be on the Twins every week.
Yeah. Tyler M. Good old Tyler M.
Our friend of the pod, Tyler M.
I just don't. What do you think they could have got for Ohtani? Like, honestly, would it have been that kind of Elvis Andrus, Matt Harrison, Sultan Lamakia franchise building trade for a couple months of a two-way player? I think an awful lot. I mean, is that a ton? Like, is it Juan Soto times 2? Like, what does he command? All of it?
Russ, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm totally speculating because I don't know what the offers that they had, you know, on the table where, but certainly, right, like 2 premium prospects to start with, right? I don't,
Yeah.
you know, is that, and then you probably throw in another piece or two. Like, is that what the package would have essentially been? Like 2, top 50 to 100 prospects, maybe a top 20 guy plus another top 75 guy, and then a couple other pieces. I don't know. What is, like, is it more than that for a rental? I don't think it would be more than that.
I think for like, if you're making that deal with the Dodgers, you can probably get one of the 2 catchers, right? Cartaya or Rushing, and then probably one of the non-Bobby Miller arms. And then, kind of pick or choose from this list of 7 guys. You can have 2 of them, right? But like, I think that the challenge, I mean, in some ways, in a variety of ways, right? The Teixeira trade changed the landscape for how these trades were done, and that teams stopped giving up players who were so close to the majors. They started to sort of go deeper into. So if you look at, like, outside of Mackenzie Gore, right, the people going back to the Nationals were mostly lower level, because teams are just way less willing to give up on a 19-year-old shortstop like Elvis Andrus, who's big league ready, probably because they know, like, he'll be in the big leagues for us next year, and teams are so much more aggressive in how they sort of promote prospects that, like, they're just not, there's this idea that there would have been like an instant sort of like, oh, wow, this is what our core looks like, in the way that it kind of was in Texas. Like, I just don't think that it's not that they wouldn't be talented. It's just they would be further away, most likely. But yeah, like, they could have got a lot, but then they wouldn't have Shohei Ohtani.
Right. And what are they next year? What are they the year after that?
Right.
What, maybe you get someone, maybe the Giants do trade Kyle Harrison and Mark Luciano, and it works out just as perfectly as they could have hoped. Does that make the Angels a playoff team? Well, I don't know, because they weren't with Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani. So, like, what are we talking about here? They needed like a 10-for-1 deal and just like grab that 5 to 15 section of another team's, and hope that 2 of them worked out. I don't know.
I don't know, man. I don't know. Hey, did you see what the Orioles did the other day?
Perhaps.
What you got on that, Grant?
Well, it definitely didn't involve Logan O'Hoppe, I'll tell you that much. No, talk about the Orioles.
Well, I mean, just the Kevin Brown stuff, I think, is
oh God. Oh yeah.
Yeah. You saw, right? Remember with the Grant, you got to stay up, man. I don't know what's going on.
I have feelings on this, but you go ahead.
2 or 3 from so-and-so.
Yeah. Grant's like furiously Googling Orioles last night. Oh, another good game for Gunnar Henderson.
Colton Cowser? Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the Orioles' ability to consistently obscure the product on the field. I think that's funny. Obviously, it's such a bizarre suspension that, like,
so bizarre.
You just sort of don't even know, like, what to say besides what are you guys doing? But it is, a nice reminder of who controls the sport. It's a collection of wealthy fellows who kind of do what they want. And sometimes their whims are more puzzling than at other times. So that's all. I just found that whole thing to be, it's going to be a topic for quite some time. It seems like, just because, this gentleman's got to go back on the air at some point, and like the team sort of has to, like, figure out how to, message the return of a broadcaster who pointed out a fact. That's, I don't know.
Nobody would have said boo. Yeah. Go ahead, Rustin.
So I watch a lot of MLB TV, like, not like every local broadcast, but, watch a lot of the local broadcasts or whatever. And I was thinking, we could pick on the Orioles or whatever, but, like, there are a lot of local broadcasts around baseball that could stand to be a little bit more critical.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there really is, like, to use the term chilling effect is kind of maybe a little extreme in baseball terms or whatever. But I think there kind of is. Like, if you watch the average local broadcast, they're not very critical of their team. And in fact, and I think that the kind of fans like it does a disservice to fans. I really think it does. And so if you are an owner of a baseball team or somebody who runs a local, broadcast or an RSN, like I really think the more honest you can be to your fans, the more they are going to appreciate it. Like I watch a lot of the Mets broadcasts, and I think they're probably like the gold standard in terms of being honest and critical of the team that they cover. The Yankees broadcast is also good, but there are a lot that could stand to be like, your team's 20 games under 500. Like you don't need to, pretend anything is different than it is, So that's all. I don't know. I just, the Orioles, this is a very, very extreme example, but they're not the first broadcast to get upset with a broadcaster for being negative. I mean, players oftentimes will say things.
Oh yeah.
I think you're in a tough spot when you're a local broadcaster. You're on the team plane.
Yeah.
Players get upset. They're hearing what you say while they're in the clubhouse, like during the game.
Yep.
So it's not an easy position to be in, but I think the more people can understand, like, a wise person once said, like, if you're, always saying, if you never say anything negative about a team or if you never say anything critical, anything you say positive really just doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So anyway, that's my general take on the situation.
I've covered good teams. I've covered awful teams. And if I'm saying anything positive about an awful team, there are going to be people in the comments being like, here comes Grant carrying the water for ownership. Oh boy, Mr. Pollyanna. And which is fine. That's just the nature of instant feedback. You're not getting that kind of instant feedback on a broadcast, right? You are just in a bubble. You are the rich scion who is involved with Orioles ownership, and maybe your dad owned the Orioles, and maybe now you are just in your bubble, and you're hearing this, and you've never heard things you don't like in your life. You don't hear no very often. You don't hear pushback, and you're listening to this, and you're going, gosh dang it, this is just, and you don't have that feedback that people actually want to hear, that they were trash against the Rays and now they're not. And that's cool. That's right. A good story. That is not making them look cheap back then. If you didn't want to look cheap in 2021, maybe don't be cheap. But like he's telling a good, positive, rags to riches story. What are you doing here? Why are you Streisand affecting this? Why are you drawing attention to a guy doing his job? And the thing is that Kevin Brown is good. I also listen to a lot of MLB TV, and I'm not gelling with all of the announcers, maybe not even most. Kevin Brown's one. He's good. He's good.
Yeah, it's just very bizarre. And the Streisand effect is a good sort of metaphor or whatever, because this is not, whatever. There is a consistent sort of push and pull, I think, for the team broadcaster. And, the Mets are a great example because, Rustin, you mentioned sort of they're probably considered the gold standard. I know, probably San Francisco. I generally I'm not awake to listen to San Francisco enough, but they're considered up there as well. Joe Davis is the king of media in LA, obviously. But, with the Mets, they're sort of refreshing in their candor about the team often, has created issues within the clubhouse. I mean, friend of the show, Buck Showalter, muted the televisions so the players can't hear them, during the games.
Wise.
Which but it does point, there's been incidents over the years, David Price and Dennis Eckersley getting into it, it's a consistent sort of push-pull. It is weird to see such a seemingly small thing that couldn't just be handled quietly. You can get that message across without sort of turning it into a multi-day, for lack of a better term, scandal, you can just say hey, frame it a different way, which I don't agree with, but it's just it's just such a bizarre overplay of a minor thing. I don't know. I am genuinely curious to see how the next few days play out as they try and as the Orioles try and land the plane on this one, because it's a remarkable own goal.
This has happened before. Like this is the Orioles let John Miller go because he was too critical. And can you guys think of one John Miller call? Like, do you know a John Miller call off the top of your head? A famous one.
Yes, him impersonating Vin Scully in Japan.
That's good. That's good. But the worst base running in the history of the game. You guys ever hear that one?
Yeah.
That's critical. That is Ruben Rivera
Yep.
doing what might be the worst base running in the history of the game. Right. And you have an announcer calling it out in the moment, and the fans ate it up. Poor Ruben Rivera, because he's known for stealing a glove and the worst base running in the history of the game. He had like a 15-year career in Mexico where he hit like 400, but he's remembered for those two things. So I feel bad there. But fans ate that up because they were watching it and go, what? How do you You're missing bases and stuff. Fans love it when the criticism is justified and fair and good. I just don't understand. Like, what are you talking about? You're watching the Orioles. There's 70 and 42. Why are you bringing negativity to a positivity party? I don't understand it.
Yeah, bless him.
I'm fired up.
But I wish not that I don't like Rustin here, but Carig would freak out about this for 45 minutes straight. Well, he's got righteous indignation at the wazoo.
Well, he'd start with a little bit of an NPR voice, and then he'd pose a hypothetical question, and he'd go, "What are we doing?" And then he'd start, boom, and then he's going off.
Russ, since we got you here, what's up with the Royals, man? They got a winning streak going.
Yeah, I mean they've they lost last night, but I think they've won like 7 of their last 11 or 7 of 10, maybe 8 of 10. I don't know. They acquired Cole Reagans for Aroldis Chapman. It was like a pre-deadline deal, but they kind of jumped it. And Cole Reagans, a former first-round pitch, he looks good. I saw he was kind of compared Alex Spire. I think compared him to James Paxton-like stuff last night at Fenway Park. So he's a guy to watch if you're a sicko who wants to hear about the Kansas City Royals in August in 2023. But, Bobby Witt Jr., he's got 20 home runs and 30-some stolen bases and a low on-base percentage. But, he's a good player. He's of over 3 wins at this point. Yeah. So he's having a good season.
So the thing about the Royals that fascinates me is it seems like the pitching revolution, so to speak, passed them by entirely. The organizational, whether it was spin rates or, attack zones or seam shifted wake. I'm still trying to figure out what that is. Whatever it is, the Royals they were caught and they're back in 2012 with a flip phone going, ooh, crap, we should probably invest in that. Since then, I believe that they have invested in more trying to redo the organizational blueprint for pitching. Have there been any positive signs in the minors at any level? I don't know. I don't know if you know. So
it's hard to say. I think the best evidence is that they seem to care about the right things now.
It's a good way to put it.
They hired Brian Sweeney from Cleveland. They, obviously Matt Quatraro and Paul Hoover from Tampa Bay. So they are putting in this infrastructure that is they care about spin rate and they care about, forcing fastballs, and they seem to know how to, build guys and give guys weapons. Is it really, so far, are there huge statistical evidence that this is working? Not to this point, but it does seem like that they seem to be more competent in the things that people should care about in 2023. I don't know if that makes sense, but they seem to have reshifted their priorities in a way that can give maybe fans more confidence that they are on the right track in terms of sort of solving the puzzle, even if the pieces are still kind of scattered around the table and not exactly not close to solving it yet.
You live in New York, right? But you're still obviously fairly connected to KC. Is the prevailing sentiment among Royals fans that the plan was solid, but the execution was sideways? You know what I'm saying? Is there a fork in the road, where fans are oh, they should have done that? Besides, because the one that always comes up is well, they could have traded people before 2017. right? Like, you could have traded all their free agents, but that always seemed like they were just never going to do that. So I'm just curious, like, what you feel like the prevailing sentiment is among like the sickos.
Yeah, well, I think this could get into a long conversation, but like, so yeah, you are right. So they win the World Series in 2015. They have this core that has about 2 years left. Could have started trading guys at that point, kind of turning things over. They didn't want to do that, so they played it out. I think the one mistake that maybe fans just point to is that post 2017, they were rebuilding and not really investing anything in payroll and basically embracing that they were going to be bad. Yet while they were embracing that they were going to be bad, they didn't really maximize any of the assets that they actually had on the roster, right? Like they re-signed Salvador Perez.
Right.
He hits 48 home runs. They don't really have any urgency to move him. Whit Merrifield, same thing, not a great player, but they waited probably a year or too long to move him when, just let him be like a solid 3.5 win player on a bad team for a couple of seasons. There's a couple other more minor examples, but like more or less, I mean, like, I think their problems were, that they haven't really, this rebuild hasn't taken because they invested in a lot of pitching and it hasn't really panned out yet. But also I think maybe they didn't really just totally embrace the idea of like, let's tear this down to the studs and rebuild our farm system and really go that way. It was almost like, we're going to try to rebuild this thing while holding on to Salvador Perez and Whit Merrifield and hoping that we can turn it over in like 3 or 4 years and those guys can be part of this next thing. And that seems to that seems to be maybe a miscalculation. Although, if they trade those guys, are they in like a significantly better position right now? I guess it's hard to say, but that would probably be the one criticism of their plan this time, was that they were rebuilding, but not totally, maximizing their assets that they had on the roster.
I can marry these last two discussion topics of the Royals, where they're talking about the pitching stuff and did they do enough of the trade. It's very easy to look at rebuilding as well. You get the top draft picks and then you make the huge trades. You trade your best players. But the underrated part of rebuilding is having just arms pop up. And all of a sudden you've got a middle reliever who's having a great season, like poof, and then teams are after him. Like Paul Sewald is maybe a little bit better than what I'm talking about, but the Royals just didn't have a Paul Sewald. The Royals weren't taking these 28, 29-year-old guys, building them up, using their knowledge to make them weaponized, and then trading them for a ton of prospects. And that's, they weren't doing that with their own guys either. Like if the Royals had made Brady Singer into a guy, if they had gone and they had made Brad Keller a guy, they would have been wildly popular at the deadline. They were just unable to do that with anyone. And so they weren't able to make those trades recently. And certainly in 2017, it's easy to look back and say, yeah, that was probably the time. I don't mind them going for it then. I think since then, it's just they haven't made baseball players better. And that's just, it's made their on-field team worse, but it's made their options as far as trading and rebuilding a lot worse too.
Yeah, I mean, to go back just full circle to the Angels, it's like why are teams in the position that they're in? It usually just comes to drafting and developing players, and it's not too much more complicated than that. And so if you're just not producing, good quality players from your minor league system consistently, it doesn't really matter whatever else, like whatever path you're choosing or when you're trading this guy or when you're doing that. Like, obviously those are decisions you should probably try to make the best, decision based on like how it's going to help your organization. But if you're just also just missing consistently on high draft picks, then it's just sort of like, okay, it makes sense why this team is done. It's not that complicated.
Right. And it's also like, I think about the Astros a lot with regard to how much hitting on one of those picks can obscure so many other things. Like, so the Astros had, I think they had the first pick 3 years in a row, and then they had the second pick the next year, right? So the first time they took Carlos Correa, huge success. The next time they took Mark Appel, then they took Brady Aiken, and then they took Alex Bregman. And having Correa and Bregman like hitting on those completely washes away the fact that they totally whiffed on 2 1-1 picks, and for the Royals, you just look at their first round, they picked pretty high year after year, and it just compounds because they're not hitting on any of these. The jury is still somewhat out on Bobby Witt. He seems like he's going to be a good player. Like they had sort of hoped he would be like an MVP type. He's 23 years old. Who knows? Like he's got, hopefully a long career ahead of him, but he hasn't been the sort of instant force maybe that they thought he would be. He's kind of more, taking a more traditional path, frankly, to develop. But like, that still doesn't obscure the fact that Asa Lacy is like still on the complex. He was like the 4th pick in 2020. They just have lots of misses, and if you miss, like even if you are missing, if you hit once or twice, it's huge. But you gotta keep you have to have some success somewhere.
Yeah, and Bobby Witt, he's an interesting player. If you just look at his season, he's actually been really, really good the last 2.5 months.
Yeah,
but his first season and then his first month and a half of his second season, it was sort of like, okay, this guy's good, but he kind of gives off some Javi Baez vibes, he doesn't get on base, he hits for power, he's kind of an electric player, but is he actually how valuable is he? Mm-hmm. That it was sort of that question. Where now he actually has played to the level of now where it's oh, maybe he's actually Manny Machado, where he
right.
He hits 35 home runs and has a 330 on base percentage, but that doesn't really matter because he's good at defense and he hits for crazy. He hits for power and does all these other things well. And that's I guess Baez to Machado is a pretty wide,
yeah.
So if he's closer to Machado, that is a significant win.
Huge,
but for a while it was oh, this guy. You'd any team would take Javi Baez, especially a Javi Baez on a rookie, the first 3 years and then an arbitration, but not exactly a superstar that you can build your whole thing around, I guess.
Javi Baez currently has a 587 OPS.
A 587 slugging? That's pretty good. Wait a second. My processing is catching up. Yeah, that trade, that signing.
And by the way, sorry, not just to he slugged 554 in 2018. He slugged his OPS once.
Yeah.
That's wild, man.
Yeah. You ever see the Far Side cartoon where it says how nature says do not touch? And it's got different animals, and then it's got a guy with a boot on his head and a floaty. Looking at Baez's strikeout to walk ratio when he's asking for 9-figure contract, it's that's how nature says do not touch. That's not going to age well. It's very rare that you see a guy with that sort of lopsided plate discipline just get better and better as the fast twitch mechanics go down.
Well, the Orioles learned the lessons of hard tanking from the Royals and the Tigers, which is trade everything and also never spend, and you will emerge as the best team, and we'll all just kind of have to deal with it.
Oh man,
Grant, when I listen to you on a podcast or we interact, all I think about is Simpsons references.
Sure.
You just brought up Gary Larson, and the first thing I thought of was, a Gary Larson calendar. And then Homer's don't get it. Don't get it. Don't get it.
I don't know that one. Wait, what season is that?
I don't know. Somebody can. I'd have to look up what episodes it's on, but it's just Homer's a Gary Larson calendar, and then he just starts scrolling through, and he's don't get it.
He's goes straight to Cow Tools. And
according to the internet, it's from Treehouse of Horror 8, season 9.
Oh, I should know that.
Yeah.
All right.
I should go. Where can someone watch The Simpsons? Where can I go back and find them?
What's streaming?
Disney Plus.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have that.
Disney Plus. That's where.
Are they just going to change the name of that to Plus someday?
They're going to change it. So what is Disney? They're going to change it to ABC Go or something, right? Because if they're going to follow the HBO Max, they're going to take the much less valuable brand name and just, we're ABC Go now. All your ABC home improvement content.
Well, yeah, we're about there. I don't know. What else you guys got?
Well, I just wanted, when you're talking about the Royals and rebuilding and all that stuff, I wanted to pose a question to Andy as someone who is actually intimately familiar with these two teams. All right, so Chris Taylor, Max Muncy, and Justin Turner. Did the Dodgers? How much of that is luck? How much of that is skill? How much of that should you expect a team like the Royals to be able to do?
Yeah. So Justin Turner is almost completely luck on the Dodgers' behalf.
Okay.
Justin Turner failed his physical. He only got signed by them because the Mets DFA'd him for, kind of roster maintenance reasons. Mets fans have rued that day for quite some time. He had made some swing changes. Marlon Byrd had hooked him up with a gentleman named Doug Latta, who's like a pool repairman in like the South Bay, who basically changed his swing a little bit. He started to show some results at the end of the year, but like he didn't get the job because, and then he was signed by the Ned Colletti regime, and like Colletti gets credit for bringing him in, but it's not like they were like, oh wow, we saw these swing changes. Like it was more like, hey, we like that guy as a player. He'd always made contact. He ran into Tim Wallach, another former Cal State Fullerton alum. I think, are those the Dirtbags? No, that's Long Beach. Maybe, I don't know. Whatever. He ran into him at a Fullerton like alumni event, and Wallach was like, "Do you have a job?" And he was like, "No, I don't." And he got signed by the Dodgers to a minor league deal. Right? He goes into this team with a bunch of stars. He eventually works his way to a position of prominence, kind of all on his own. Chris Taylor, they traded Zach Lee, who was, this big he had been a quarterback at LSU. Who tried to be a pitcher but didn't do it. They traded Zach Lee for him, and Taylor basically spent a year kind of bouncing back and forth between the minors and the majors. Kind of the same thing happened with Max Muncy. The A's got rid of him. They just kind of cut him, and Farhan Zaidi had kind of liked some of his, characteristics. And so they signed him, and he spent a year going back and forth. He actually didn't. He just spent the whole year in AAA, all of 17. And the point is that they get credit for identifying players with certain characteristics that could be enhanced. They get credit for hooking them up with outside help. Like Chris Taylor went and worked, I believe, with Craig Wallenbrock and Robert Van Scoik, who were two of the hitting guys who, helped fix JD Martinez. Van Scoik is now the Dodgers hitting coach, like full stop. But back then they were, two kooky guys in a garage. Muncy made some swing changes as well. And when those guys came up to the majors, this is a very long thing, but it's also similar to Turner. When they came up to the majors, they were batting 7th, 8th. Like they're, a guy who gets to play when the stars need a day off. And they weren't expected to be, all-stars. They weren't expected to do much of anything. Anything the team got from them was a bonus. But the Dodgers had created this sort of, through a combination of money, luck, scouting, all this stuff, where they could basically afford random guys runway to be stars if they could continue to play. And so if you're like a team
should the Royals be able to do that?
So the thing is, like, what happens if Max Muncy does all those things and he's crushing in AAA and the Royals bring him up and he install him as like the number 3 hitter because he's you know what I mean? Like, like what becomes of that? What happens if he's not in a clubhouse where every day he's interacting with Justin Turner and Corey Seager and Cody Bellinger and Jock Peterson? And if he wants to go talk to Clayton Kershaw, like he can go do that, like how much of that is the culture that they have, the resources that they have? Like, I think that they have, it's not an unfair advantage, but they're so much further ahead with the amount of talent that they had in-house that they were able to do all the other ancillary things. Like, so I think other teams can do that, but it's just really hard. I mean, you just don't see many teams doing that anymore. There was a period of time where a bunch of guys kind of got pulled off the scrap heap and made into stars, and that period's kind of ended. in part because the way players are evaluated has changed, and teams are more like understanding of like, okay, that guy's like the way Max Muncy controls a strike zone. When I see that in a guy who's playing, in high school or college, I want that in a way that in 2016 it wasn't as noted, in sort of the evaluation process. But there's not a lot of guys. It's with relievers, sure, a guy falls off the back of the turnip truck and he's Deeks McDeakerson for the Rays, but like for position players, it's just not as common anymore,
Yeah. Okay. That's a great answer. I can't believe that we fit like actual really good baseball stuff in the last 5 minutes. I will end with a hypothetical. What do you think Robert Van Scoyk could do for Logan O'Hoppe's swing?
I hope Robert Van Scoyk becomes your new guy.
Oh man, because I looked at that and that I knew how it read on paper. It seems like it's a last name that could be like pronounced like Krzyzewski, like almost like a Robert Van Schwa or something. But boy, I like that. So yeah,
it might be Skoyak. I don't know. He doesn't really talk to the media, so I'm not too worried about it.
I'm going with Schwa just because I remember 7th grade English class.
Robert Van Schwa. He's a Dutch Frenchman.
Robert Van Schwa. Those Dutch French, they'll get you. All right. This has been episode 60 of the Roundtable. I would like to thank pinch hitter Rustin Dodd. Rustin, you brought the energy. Marc's on thin ice, so we might have you back. Marc's not adding a ton. Andy, have you noticed that? Like he's just not.
Unlike Marc, Rustin has written a book.
Where's my damn book on the A's, Marc?
Yeah, Marc.
Yeah,
maybe that's where he is. Maybe he's on book leave. He's not on book leave.
Oh man, I hope so. Yeah, Marc said the Angels should buy. Andy and I were like,
you know what else you should buy? Kingdom Quarterback by Rustin Dodd and Marc Dent.
Thank you. It's out August 22nd.
And it's about Patrick Mahomes and just Kansas City sports.
Patrick Mahomes and the history of Kansas City. So if you like American cities and stories like that, you'll love this book.
The kid I don't really know much about. His dad though, how much is his dad featured in the book?
He's featured quite a bit. We tell his story as well, so there's quite a bit of that. We tell a story about how the Diamondbacks almost drafted Patrick Mahomes like very high in the draft out of high school. They were the team that was probably most. He was drafted by the Tigers, but that was like kind of a 37th round pick, kind of just not a real thing. But the Diamondbacks went into his home about a week or two before the draft and were sort of negotiating a number. The Mahomes kind of threw out a number and it was pretty high. And the Diamondbacks ultimately were like, yeah, this kid probably wants to play football. But they were probably the team that was most hot on his trail. So
as a Niners fan, I don't know how to feel with the idea that the Diamondbacks should have helped the Niners. That's pretty annoying to me. Damn it, Diamondbacks. All right, buy the book. Buy the book. Thank you so much, Rustin. We will be back next week to talk about baseball because that's what we do. We'll see you then.